In the course of my college years, I've had the privilege of working on a couple of occasions in dormitories. Privileges, yes, but it was challenging work and not always completely gratifying. It was sometimes difficult because you're dealing with people. One was in a church college, and that was easier. But one was in a big university, a big dormitory, where there were hundreds, literally hundreds and hundreds of students in the dormitory. And the structure of it was that there was a residence director, 2 head residents, and then a bunch of RAs who were under the purview of the head residents, guiding and leading all these students, divided up in a variety of ways. One of the things that was pleasing about that arrangement was that the residence director, because they were kind of distanced from in the main office and distanced from the actual dormitory itself, they relied on the head residents for a lot of input in terms of decisions that needed to be made and that kind of thing. And so we became, pretty close, all 3 of us, in talking about the things that needed to be talked about. And one time there was an RA who left suddenly at one point in the year, and we needed to replace that person quickly. And so the residence director called us in and talked to the 2 of us and said, "These are the people that have applied. What are your thoughts?" Well, there was one person who applied that I was radically opposed to. I was opposed to him because I knew him to be a person that was a drug user, that used alcohol regularly. And though I'm not necessarily a prude, in the position that we had taking responsibility for the leadership and guidance of younger students, we needed people who were a little bit at least discreet, if not more conservative in the use of that kind of thing. In addition to that, I knew him to be a person of questionable morality, having seen him with a number of different partners over the course of the months that had preceded. And so I was opposed to this person. Now, my colleague, the other head resident, was in favor of this person because this person was smart. He was affable in every conceivable way. He was popular. He was the kind of person that drew people to him. And it was the opinion of that head resident that such leadership would be very helpful as we move forward in trying to manage this huge dormitory. And we had this disagreement, and I remember distinctly how much I vilified that person. Not the person that was being selected, but vilified my colleague because I thought to myself, how could you possibly be so blind? I knew that I was right, don't we all? I knew that I was right in my judgment about this other person. I knew that I was right about everything that I had said about this person and all of the things that I could delineate. And I just couldn't understand how a person for whom I had respect would not see that and not come to agree with me. Well, some time went by, and turns out that I was right. The person who was hired, this individual, ended up failing miserably, doing things that were inappropriate and being dismissed. I remember 3 things happening that humbled me in rapid succession. First was my sense of pride about how I had been right. I was vindicated in having been ignored not only by my colleague, the other head resident, but also by the residence director. I had been vindicated because this person clearly had proven to be precisely the person I thought he was. Secondly, and this was harder for me, and I don't reflect on this with a great deal of pride, you should know. I came upon an incident in the dormitory where there were a bunch of students who were behaving in challenging ways, and I can't describe what all of those things were, but what I can tell you is that I saw my colleague perform absolutely admirably. Everything that was done with sensitivity and kindness, appropriate discipline, and profound wisdom. And at that moment in time, I realized what an arrogant jerk I'd been. Because I had disagreed with that individual about the position taken on the hiring of this other guy, I'd turned them into a monster. And I saw that I was wrong. The third thing that happened that was kind of a kick to the stomach as far as my arrogance was concerned was the residence director called us in and said a couple things to us that I knew to be directed at me in some measure. She said, "This was not your call. There was nothing about this that was your call. It was my call. It was my judgment to decide on the basis of the information that I had who would be the best hire." Now, it turned out that the decision that we took eventually was not the best one for us. But it is not your responsibility to claim victory because you were right and the other was wrong, and nor is it your responsibility to take responsibility for a bad choice. It is mine and mine alone. Not your call, but mine. The director was concerned that our relationship was tarnished because of the way in which we had begun to think of each other. But we assured her that we were in a good place and we'd regained respect for one another. In our text today, we see a rather strange story. In fact, all three texts somehow or other point to God's position of being judge over us. And that's a scary proposition because, first of all, we don't want to be judged. We don't want to be evaluated. We don't want to be looked at in any kind of an uncomfortable way. And so we tend to push back against these things. But the reading from Amos in particular, you should look at it again if you have a chance, or listen to it again. The reading was exceedingly well done. But it's a text that points out that we don't have a real good clue of what it will be like when God judges us. We don't know what God's judgment is, what wisdom weighs into it, or where it comes from. But what is clear is that it's not our call. It's God's call. Similarly, Paul's counsel to the Thessalonians is one which suggests that we need to let go of our arrogance and hang on to what it is that God is bringing for us. Now, in our gospel lesson, we have this cool but confusing story. First of all, I want to talk about Parthenos. It's a Greek word which means maiden, translated here as virgin. Don't want to get lost in that. The culture of the day was such that when there was a wedding was considered to be the creation of a new family, and so there was great celebration. And certain traditions were honored and respected, and so that when the bridegroom came to the home of the bride to fetch the bride for the wedding, there was great celebration, and she would gather around her other maidens, other unmarried women, other virgins, if you like, to go out to greet the bridegroom so that when the bridegroom arrived, the wedding feast could begin. And sometimes the bridegroom would come from a distance away and the waiting would take some time. Now, in this particular story, the Parthenoi, the maidens, sometimes they're called bridesmaids, sometimes translated as maidens, in this case virgins. They were there waiting and waiting and waiting, and the bridegroom never showed up when they anticipated that he would. Now, 5 had been foolish and 5 were wise. 5 were silly in this translation, 5 were wise. The wise ones, of course, took with them extra oil to keep their lamps going in case he arrived late. The foolish ones did not. They were silly. They didn't think that far into the future. They just went out there to wait because they were pumped up. The bridegroom was coming, a new family was being created. This was going to be a wonderful celebration, and that's all they could see. Be clear now that the text doesn't say that these were evil people, bad people. They were just not wise. And even the wise maidens did not criticize them necessarily. They just said to them, go buy your own and let them be. But one feature of this text that was pointed out by Dr. Lose and by Dr. Howard and other commentators this week who commented on it was that God's judgment in the Gospel of Matthew is always prevalent. God always leaves judgment in the hands of God and God alone. And this passage seems kind of harsh. These poor girls, and we can imagine them probably being 15, 16-year-old kids, came to the party with their oil. Yeah, they were late, but so what? They were friends of the girl, friends of the bride. They came to the party, they knocked on the door, and the bridegroom said, "Do I know you? I don't think I know you." And he closed the door. They were excluded because of their silliness. The nature of that judgment we don't know, but it suggests, the text suggests a couple of things. One is that we need to be ready, and the other is that we've got to let go of this obsession that we have with judging one another, with critiquing one another, with being negative towards one another. And this is, in this particular week, most especially true. We have waited the results for an historic election which officially and formally have not yet been given, but have been called by most major news sites. And we find ourselves in an awkward place. We find ourselves in an awkward place because the previous months and indeed years that have led up to this event, that have led up to this election, have been filled with acrimony and negativity and judgment, one of the other. We feel so strongly about our position, just as I did about this fellow that was being hired at the dorm. I felt so strongly about it, I could not understand why my colleague couldn't get it. What is wrong with you? Don't you see how this person behaves? My colleague, on the other hand, said, "Well, but here are the things that are positive." But they weren't compelling enough to convince me. And so we ended up not seeing eye to eye and actually thinking ill towards one another. And it wasn't until I was offered the corrective from the residence director and with my own eyes seeing the skill with which this person dealt with other people that I realized my own arrogance. That kind of arrogance is something that these days we're seeing a lot of. People vilifying one another because of their opinions. And forgetting one very important thing, that all of these matters about which we have opinions are not our call. God alone is judge. God provides us wisdom and gives us the opportunity and capacity to share our opinions and to work according to them. But we are not ever to vilify someone with whom we disagree. Sisters and brothers, in this time of, we hear the word polarization, but I mean there's no other word to say it. In this time of polarization in our country and in the world, we need to get past this. Not as a political gesture, but as one of faith. Recognizing that our capacity to live freely depends upon our capacity to leave the judgment in God's hands, to let God make the calls for us, and to do the best we can in accordance with that. And the challenge of that is that we will disagree, and we will have to find ways to live together. And I'm happy to say it's possible. There are people in our own congregation, and some of you will know who I'm talking about here, with whom I profoundly disagree on almost everything. But those same people I see to be people of profound faith and compassion and love. And I am proud to say, therefore, that they are my friend. We don't have to live with tension and anger and hatred one toward the other, even when we disagree. We can embrace one another for the sake of the one who died for us. That's what's important, is that God died for each of us so that we might have life. Now, in the middle of this life, we got all kinds of things to deal with. We have pandemics to deal with. We have political things to deal with. We have economic things to deal with, all kinds of things. And we can agree or disagree. Some will drive Fords, some will drive Toyotas, some will drive Chevys, some will prefer to walk. Nobody is ultimately right or ultimately wrong. We are called upon to live together with that diversity in love. My plea to you this morning, brothers and sisters, is that if you consider your friends to be somehow off because they don't agree with you, or to be among the group that we would call the foolish or silly virgins, the silly maidens, remember that that judgment is skewed by your own perception. In some measure, we're all silly. And the ultimate arbiter of all of these things is God alone. Not our call. It's God's call. Thanks be to God that it's God's call, because otherwise I would rightly be condemned by myself so many times over and over again. Be one, sisters and brothers, for God has made us one. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Gracious Lord, in the face of disagreement, in the face of arrogance, in the face of challenge, we ask your forgiveness. But more than anything in terms of the things we can ask in this world, we ask that you help us to have the capacity to love one another again, to get past our arrogant presumption and to realize that our sisters and brothers are our sisters and brothers in this world, and that that is something that we have to celebrate. Not that we're right or they're right, not that we're wrong or they're wrong, but that God has given us God's family. Help us to celebrate that and to leave judgment only and always in your hands alone. In your holy name we pray. Amen.